In today's video, we're going to see the true crimes of the 1980s. But you won't see any famous or known cases like Jeffrey Dahmer or anything. I specifically chose the lesser-known ones that are also the most interesting. So unlike the usual true crimes where a murder happened, all of these crimes have a very unique angle to them. Like some are killer nurses, others are serial killer grandmas, creepy stalkers, and so on. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. In the late 1970s, two men named Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris formed one of the most disturbing criminal duos in U.S. history. They became known as the Toolbox Killers, a name given because of the tools they used in their crimes. The two met in 1977 at a California prison called the Men's Colony. Both were serving time for violent crimes, Bittaker for stabbing a store clerk, and Norris for assault and other offenses. While in prison, they became close friends and realized they shared similar dark interests. They would talk for hours about kidnapping and harming women. Over time, these fantasies turned into real plans. Lawrence Bittaker was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1940. He was adopted soon after birth, but his childhood was unstable. His adoptive father moved the family around the country because of work, so Bittaker never had a chance to form lasting friendships. He often felt abandoned, which may have fueled his anger and lack of empathy. From the age of 12, he was arrested for minor thefts. Despite being very intelligent and reportedly having a genius-level IQ, he dropped out of school because he found it boring and pointless. As an adult, Bittaker's crimes grew worse. He was described by doctors as paranoid and emotionally detached. His final arrest before meeting Norris came after he attacked a store clerk with a knife while trying to steal a piece of steak. He was sent to prison for assault with a deadly weapon, and it was there that he met Roy Norris. Roy Norris was born in Colorado in 1948. His childhood was filled with neglect and instability. His parents only married because of social pressure after his mother became pregnant. His father was abusive, and his mother struggled with addiction. Norris spent most of his youth in foster care, where he was reportedly mistreated. This led to lifelong problems with self-esteem and trust. He joined the Navy at 17 and served briefly in Vietnam, but was discharged after being caught using drugs and behaving violently. Back home, Norris's crimes escalated quickly. He attacked several women, was caught multiple times, and was eventually declared dangerous by psychiatrists. He spent time in a mental hospital before being sent to prison again, where he would cross paths with Bittaker. In prison, Bittaker and Norris bonded over their shared anger and fantasies of control. Norris often talked about how fear in his victims gave him a sense of power. Bittaker, who liked feeling in control, was drawn to this idea. Together, they began planning how they could act out their fantasies once they were free. Bittaker was released first in 1978, followed by Norris a few months later in early 1979. They met again soon after and decided to carry out the plans they had made behind bars. They bought a silver GMC van with no rear windows, which they called the Murder Mac. They modified it with a bed and hidden tools, pretending it was just a camper van. Their plan was to offer rides to young hitchhikers and take them to a remote mountain area. For weeks, they practiced by picking up hikers, talking to them, and dropping them off safely. This was their way of learning how to gain trust. Eventually, they were ready to act. Their first known victim was Lucinda Cindy Schaefer, a 16-year-old girl walking home from church in June 1979. They offered her a ride, and when she refused, they parked ahead and grabbed her as she passed by. They drove her to the mountains, where both men attacked her. Afterwards, they killed her to prevent being identified. Their next victim, Andrea Hall, was an 18-year-old hitchhiker they picked up a month later. This time, they took photos and subjected her to a longer ordeal. Bittaker eventually killed her when Norris wasn't looking, showing how far he had already descended into cruelty. In September 1979, they kidnapped two friends, Jackie Gilliam, 15, and Leah Lamp, 13, who were waiting at a bus stop. The girls realized too late that they were being taken in the wrong direction. When they tried to escape, the men stopped them using force. The pair kept the girls trapped in the mountains for nearly 2 days. During that time, the men took photos, recorded parts of their crimes, and used the tools from their toolbox. Eventually, both girls were killed and their bodies left in remote canyon areas. Their final known victim was Shirley Lynette Ledford, a 16-year-old girl they picked up on Halloween night in 1979. She was the only victim whose suffering was recorded on tape, a piece of evidence that later horrified the courtroom and the public. Their killing spree ended when Norris couldn't keep quiet. He bragged about the crimes to a former friend who was so disturbed that he went to the police. Investigators quickly found evidence linking both men to the murders. When they searched Bittaker's van and apartment, they discovered Polaroid pictures of some of the victims, along with the recorded tape of Shirley Ledford. In court, Norris agreed to testify against Bittaker in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison. Bittaker received the death sentence in 1981 and remained on death row until his death in 2019. In July 1984, 53-year-old Don Nichols and his 19-year-old son Dan were living in the mountains of Big Sky, Montana. They were survivalists who spent their days away from society. But they had a dark idea. Don wanted to find a woman who could live with them in the wilderness, and he decided his son needed a mountain bride. On July 15, 1984, that idea turned into a horrible crime. Kari Swenson was 22 years old, a college student studying microbiology at Montana State University, and a talented biathlon athlete training for Team USA. She was working at Lone Mountain Ranch for the summer, where she could both work and train in the mountains. After finishing her morning shift, she decided to go for a run near a scenic place called Ularice Lakes. It was a normal, sunny afternoon, until she saw 2 strange men in camouflage standing on the trail. They were dirty and rough-looking. Kari thought about turning back, but she decided to keep running and ignore them. As she got closer, the older man, Don Nichols, stepped in front of her and started asking questions. He asked if she worked at the resort and if she was married. To protect herself, Kari lied and said she was, but Don's son Dan said coldly, "She's lying. All women lie." That's when Don grabbed her wrists. She shouted for him to let her go, but he held tight. Don told her they just wanted to take her into the mountains to see if she liked living there. When she screamed, he hit her hard on the head, knocking her down. Dizzy and scared, Kari couldn't fight back as they tied her up with rope. Don then looked at his son and said, "Do you want to keep her?" Dan smiled and said yes. The 2 men forced Kari to walk deeper into the forest at gunpoint. After hours of hiking, they stopped for the night and tied her to a tree with a chain around her waist. Don left to hunt squirrels, leaving Kari alone with Dan. He started showing her inappropriate drawings of women and told her she was pretty. Kari cried and begged him to let her go, but he said he wanted her to stay. When Don returned, she begged them not to hurt her. Don told her they weren't going to harm her. They just wanted her to stay until she chose to live with them. When Kari didn't show up for her evening shift, her coworkers got worried. They found her car still parked near the lake and called her family. Everyone feared the worst, maybe a bear attack. Her father even used a helicopter to search the area. From the forest, Kari could hear people calling her name and even the sound of the helicopter. She begged the Nichols to let her go, but Don said if anyone found them, he would kill them. The next morning, 2 searchers, Alan Goldstein and Jim Schwalb, followed the trail and finally found Kari tied to a tree. But instead of feeling safe, Kari panicked. She screamed for them to leave, warning that the Nichols would kill them. Don panicked too. He shouted for his son to shut her up. Dan walked toward Kari, looked at her rescuers, then pointed his gun at her and shot her in the chest. Kari fell to the ground, bleeding. Alan tried to help her, but Don raised his shotgun and shot Alan in the face, killing him instantly. Jim ran for help while the Nichols fled, leaving Kari for dead. Kari lay there, unable to move. Each breath was painful, but her athlete's training helped her stay calm. She survived for 4 hours before rescuers arrived. The bullet had gone through her chest and shoulder, collapsing a lung, but she lived. Sadly, Alan Goldstein died at the scene. The Nichols disappeared into the mountains, leaving behind a tree carving that read, "Don and Dan Nichols live in these mountains." It took 8 days for Kari to leave the hospital, but when she did, she was upset to see how the media treated the story. Instead of calling the Nichols dangerous criminals, some newspapers romanticized them, calling them mountain men who just wanted a simple life. Sheriff Johnny France, who led the search, even compared Don to Daniel Boone and called Dan a nice boy. Some reporters even suggested that the shooting was an accident. Kari's father spoke out, reminding everyone that these men had kidnapped and tried to murder his daughter and killed her rescuer. For 5 months, the Nichols hid in the mountains, moving constantly to avoid capture. They lived off stolen food and supplies, sneaking into cabins when needed. Finally, in December 1984, Sheriff France found their camp after a tip from a rancher. Wearing white camouflage, he approached them quietly in the snow. Instead of fighting, Don and Dan finally gave up and were arrested. In May 1985, Dan Nichols went on trial for kidnapping and assault. His lawyers said he was controlled by his father and didn't know better. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. 2 months later, Don Nichols went on trial and was found guilty of murder, kidnapping, and assault, receiving 85 years in prison. Kari slowly recovered from her injuries and returned to competing in biathlon events. In 1987, her story became a TV movie called The Abduction of Kari Swenson, where Kari herself worked as a technical advisor and even did her own stunts. Kari later revealed that the Nichols were not true mountain men at all. They survived only by stealing from cabins and poaching animals. They weren't heroes living off the land. As Kari said, they were caught because they were cold, hungry, and tired of the mountains. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when no one seemed to be there? That strange, uneasy feeling that makes you look over your shoulder for no reason. For most people, it's just a passing thought. But for Dorothy Jane Scott, it was real. Someone really was watching her, and what happened to her remains one of California's most chilling mysteries. Dorothy Jane Scott was a 32-year-old single mother living with her 4-year-old son, Sean, and her aunt in Stanton, California. She worked as a secretary for 2 small shops in Anaheim called Swinger's Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop. Her father had once co-owned them, and both stores were next to each other, so Dorothy mostly stayed in the back office doing paperwork. Even though the shops sold things linked to the hippie culture of the time, Dorothy wasn't like that world at all. She was quiet, religious, and very shy. Friends said she didn't go out much, rarely dated, and spent most of her time working or caring for her little boy. She was known for being kind, helpful, and generous, someone who always thought of others before herself. On the evening of May 28, 1980, Dorothy went to work for an employee meeting after dropping her son off at her parents' house. During the meeting, one of her co-workers, Conrad, began to look very sick. He had a rash on his arm and felt dizzy. Worried, Dorothy offered to drive him to the hospital, and another co-worker named Pam came along to help. On the way to the hospital, Dorothy quickly stopped at her parents' home to check on her son. While there, she changed the black scarf she was wearing to a red one, then headed to the UCI doctors, found that Conrad had been bitten by a black widow spider, so they rushed him in for treatment. Dorothy and Pam waited in the lobby for several hours until Conrad was ready to leave. Around 11 p.m., Dorothy told them she would go get the car and bring it to the front so Conrad wouldn't have to walk far. She left, and a few minutes later, her car suddenly came speeding toward them. But instead of stopping, it swerved sharply and drove out of the parking lot at high speed. The headlights were so bright that Pam and Conrad couldn't see who was driving. They thought maybe Dorothy had an emergency with her son, so they waited, but she never came back. A few hours later, her white Toyota station wagon was found burning in an alley about 10 miles away. Dorothy was gone. Dorothy's parents, Jacob and Vera Scott, were terrified. Police started searching for her, but there were no clues. Then, a week later, Vera received a call from an unknown man who said, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" When she said yes, the voice said, "I've got her," and hung up. Soon after, the same man called a local newspaper and told the editor, "I killed her. She was my love, and I caught her cheating with another man." He also mentioned small details that hadn't been made public, like the red scarf and the spider bite. That's when police realized this caller really knew Dorothy. It turned out that months before she disappeared, Dorothy had been getting strange phone calls from a man who claimed he loved her, but also threatened her. Sometimes he was kind, other times he said terrible things. He even described where she had been that day, proving he was following her. Once, he told her to go outside and check her car, and when she did, she found a single dead rose on her windshield. Another time, he told her, "When I get you alone, I'll turn you into pieces so no one will ever find you." Dorothy was so scared she started taking karate lessons and even thought about buying a gun. Her friends said she mentioned that the man's voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't figure out who it was. After Dorothy's disappearance, the phone calls to her parents continued, every Wednesday afternoon for 4 long years. The man would ask things like, "Is Dorothy there?" or say, "I've got her." He always called when Dorothy's mother was home alone and hung up before police could trace the line. Police checked all the men in Dorothy's life, including her ex-boyfriend and co-workers, but found no suspects. Her father even offered a $2,500 reward for information, but nothing came of it. Then one night in April 1984, 4 years after the calls began, the phone rang again, but this time Dorothy's father answered. The caller said nothing and hung up. In August 1984, a construction worker in Anaheim found human bones buried in a field. Next to them were dog bones, placed on top as if someone had done it on purpose. The remains were slightly burned, and police realized they'd been there for years. Among the bones was a turquoise ring and a watch that had stopped at 12:30 a.m., May 29, 1980, just an hour after Dorothy's car sped out of the hospital parking lot. The jewelry was identified as Dorothy's, and dental records confirmed the remains were hers. The cause of death could not be determined. After the news broke, the Scott family received 2 more calls from the same voice asking, "Is Dorothy home?" Then the calls stopped forever. The killer was never found. No one knows who the stalker was or why he targeted Dorothy. Her parents passed away without ever learning the truth. Robert Berdella was one of the most disturbing criminals in American history. He was known as the Kansas City Butcher because of how he treated his victims. His crimes took place in Kansas City, Missouri, between 1984 and 1987. Robert Andrew Berdella was born on January 31, 1949, in Ohio. He was the oldest of 2 boys. His family was very religious and went to church often. Robert was quiet and shy. He had bad eyesight and wore thick glasses from a young age. His father often compared him to his younger brother, who was more confident and outgoing. This made Robert feel unloved and ignored. When Robert was a teenager, his father passed away from a heart attack on Christmas Day in 1965. The loss deeply affected him. After this, Robert became bitter and angry. He started to question his religion and stopped believing in faith altogether. Around this time, Robert saw a movie called The Collector. It was about a man who kidnaps a woman and keeps her locked away until she dies. This movie had a strong effect on him. Years later, he said it gave him ideas about control and power, which would later show in his crimes. After his father's death, his mother remarried, and Robert saw it as a betrayal. He became more isolated and began writing to pen pals in different countries. He collected stamps and photos, which sparked his interest in antiques and artwork. In 1967, Robert graduated high school with good grades and moved to Kansas City to attend the Kansas City Art Institute. He wanted to become an art teacher. At first, he was a good student, but by his second year, he became rebellious and started using drugs. He also began selling drugs to other students. He was once arrested for trying to sell drugs to an undercover officer, but was released after paying bail. Later, he dropped out of art school after being criticized for killing animals and calling it art. After leaving school, Robert stayed in Kansas City. He bought a small house and opened an antique booth at the local market. He sold art, jewelry, and collectibles. Many people in the area knew him as a strange but friendly man. He also became active in his neighborhood's crime prevention group, which made him seem like a responsible citizen, though he was secretly hiding dark thoughts. By the late 1970s, Berdella lived alone. He was openly gay and often spent time with men who were struggling, drug users, people who worked on the streets, or people with nowhere to go. He told others he was helping them, but in truth, he was using them for his own gain. His first known victim was Jerry Howell, a 19-year-old boy he knew through a friend. On July 5, 1984, Berdella offered Jerry a ride to a party. Instead, he drugged him and took him to his house. There, he kept Jerry tied up and hurt him for over a day until he died. Berdella later got rid of the body by making pieces and throwing them away with the trash. Over the next 3 years, Berdella continued to target young men, usually people he already knew. He used drugs, electric shocks, and torture to control them. Each time he wrote down notes describing what he did. In 1985, his next victim, Robert Sheldon, came to stay with him for a few days. Berdella decided to keep him captive instead. When workers came to the house unexpectedly, Berdella panicked and killed him early. He disposed of the body in a similar way. His following victims included Mark Wallace, James Ferris, Todd Stoops, and Larry Pearson. Berdella's cruelty grew worse with time. He kept some of them for days or even weeks before they died. He wanted to test how much pain a person could handle and kept detailed records of everything he did. In 1987, Larry Pearson bit Berdella during one of his attacks. Enraged, Berdella beat him to death. He later went to the hospital for his injury. Pearson's remains were later found in Berdella's home and backyard. Berdella's final victim, Christopher Bryson, managed to escape in March 1988. Bryson was a 22-year-old who had been drugged, tied up, and tortured. Over time, he gained Berdella's trust and convinced him to untie one of his hands. When Berdella left the house, Bryson managed to free himself, jump out a second-floor window, and run to a nearby police officer for help. Police quickly went to Berdella's house and arrested him. When they searched the house, what they found was horrifying. They discovered human skulls, bones, and teeth, along with chains, ropes, drugs, and tools he used on his victims. They also found hundreds of Polaroid photos showing the victims before and after their deaths, and notebooks describing every act in detail. Investigators confirmed that at least 6 men had been murdered by Berdella between 1984 and 1987. He was charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and assault. At first, he refused to talk, but later made a deal to avoid the death penalty. He confessed to the killings in exchange for life in prison. He spent the rest of his life in prison until he died of a heart attack in 1992. Even today, people remember him as one of the most disturbing and cruel killers in American history. The Monster with 21 Faces, the Glico-Morinaga Case, Japan, 1984. If you don't know the name Glico, you might still recognize some of their famous snacks like Pocky or Pretz. But long before these treats became known worldwide, the company was at the center of one of Japan's most terrifying mysteries. Glico is a Japanese candy company founded in Osaka almost 100 years ago. In 1984, the company was being run by a new CEO who had taken over from his father 2 years earlier. Katsuhisa was 42 years old, with a young family and a lot of pressure to continue his father's success. But nothing could have prepared him for what would happen one night in March 1984. On March 18, 1984, around 9 p.m., 2 men broke into the Izaki family home while Katsuhisa was taking a bath. They tied up his wife and one of their children. Katsuhisa tried to hide in the bathroom with his other 2 kids, but the kidnappers found him and took him away. The family escaped and called the police, but by then, the kidnappers were gone. The next morning, the kidnappers demanded a ransom, about $4.3 million in cash and 220 pounds of gold. But surprisingly, just 3 days later, Katsuhisa escaped unharmed. He told police he had been kept in a warehouse not far from Glico's headquarters, and that he had escaped because his captors left him alone for some reason. Crimes like this were extremely rare in Japan, and many people couldn't believe something like this could happen there. But this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would last for more than a year. A few weeks later, on April 10th, several cars outside Glico's offices were set on fire. Then, a few days later, a container filled with acid and a threatening note was found inside one of the company's buildings. It was clear that the same people behind the kidnapping were still after Glico. In May 1984, things got even worse. Both Glico and several media outlets received letters saying that poisoned candies would be placed on store shelves. The letters were signed by someone calling themselves the Monster with 21 Faces. The name was believed to come from a famous Japanese mystery story about a fiend with 20 faces, a master of disguise who outsmarted the police. Panic spread quickly. Glico pulled $21 million worth of products from stores, and sales dropped by half. Many workers lost their jobs, but when police tested the products, no poison was found. The letters, however, kept coming. The monster mocked police, calling them stupid and incompetent, and even bragged about how easily they had fooled them. Security cameras later caught a man wearing glasses, a business suit, and a baseball cap placing something on a store shelf. He became known as the videotaped man. But police never identified him or proved his connection to the case. In June 1984, the monster suddenly sent a new letter saying they were done with Glico. The note said, "The president of Glico has already suffered enough. We forgive him." It even joked about eating Glico snacks while planning to travel to Europe. Everyone thought it was finally over, but it wasn't. Just 2 days later, another food company, Marudai Foods, began receiving threats from the same group. They demanded money again, and police tried to set up a trap using an undercover officer to deliver the ransom. On the train, the officer noticed a man watching him, a man with short hair, glasses, and sharp fox-like eyes. The officer followed him, but the man slipped away. This fox-eyed man became one of the most mysterious figures in the case. Soon, more companies were targeted, including Fujiya, House Foods, and Morinaga, one of Japan's largest candy brands. In October 1984, Morinaga received letters saying that cyanide-laced candies had been placed in stores. This time, it wasn't a bluff. Packages of Morinaga candy were found with extra labels reading, "Danger, contains poison, the monster with 21 faces." Tests confirmed the candy was indeed poisoned. More than 40,000 police officers were sent to guard supermarkets, hoping to catch whoever was behind it, but no one was ever found. By early 1985, more poisoned products appeared, and the police finally thought they had a suspect, a man with Yakuza connections who resembled the fox-eyed sketch. But after investigating, they found his alibis were solid, and he was cleared. The case dragged on with no answers. People were angry at the police, who seemed helpless. The pressure was so intense that one senior officer, Superintendent Shoji Yamamoto, took his own life in August 1985. Soon after, the monster sent one final message. Superintendent Yamamoto died like a man. We give our condolences. We will stop attacking food companies. If anyone else does, it's not us. We are bad guys, but we have other things to do. And just like that, the monster with 21 faces disappeared, forever. No one was ever arrested. No one knows who the monster really was or why they did it. They never actually took any ransom money, and they even warned people before the poisoned candy could harm anyone. Many believe they didn't want to kill, but wanted to embarrass the police and prove how powerless they were. The Alpine Manor Murders, Gwendolyn Graham and Cathy Wood, USA, 1988. This is the story of two women whose love turned deadly. Gwendolyn Graham and Cathy Wood were nicknamed the Lethal Lovers after a series of shocking murders took place inside a nursing home in Michigan. Catherine Cathy Wood was born on March 7, 1962 in Washington. She grew up in Michigan, where she married a man named Ken Wood. The couple had a daughter named Jackie in 1980. Cathy worked at a nursing home called Alpine Manor, and over time she became a supervisor there. Her co-workers said she was serious and dependable. But her marriage to Ken began falling apart, and soon the two divorced. Around this same time, in 1986, a new nurse's aide named Gwendolyn Gwen Graham started working at Alpine Manor. Gwen had moved from Texas looking for a fresh start. She was born in 1963 in California and had a difficult childhood. At work, Gwen and Cathy became close friends. Cathy was lonely after her divorce, and Gwen was someone she could talk to. Soon, the friendship became romantic. Their co-workers noticed that their relationship was intense. They often played strange jokes at work, like hiding under patients' beds to scare other staff members. People thought they were weird, but didn't imagine how dark things would get. Gwen was known to be possessive, and their love quickly turned into something obsessive and dangerous. According to Cathy, it was Gwen who came up with a disturbing idea, a game involving killing patients at the nursing home. However, some people believe it was Cathy who was truly in control. Cathy later said that the plan was to choose victims whose first names would spell out the word murder. But after the first killing, they dropped that idea and decided to target people who couldn't fight back. Their victims were elderly patients with serious illnesses such as Alzheimer's or dementia. These people depended completely on the staff for care and safety. The women used this trust to carry out their terrible acts. Their first victim was 58-year-old Margaret Chambers, who had been admitted to Alpine Manor in 1985. Her family noticed that something seemed wrong. Margaret was afraid and didn't look well cared for, but they trusted the staff. In January 1987, she died suddenly, and doctors believed it was from natural causes. But according to Cathy, Gwen had smothered Margaret while Cathy kept watch. When the death went unnoticed, the women felt powerful. They believed they could get away with anything. Over the next few months, they killed at least 4 more residents. Mae Mason, 79, Edith Cook, 98, Myrtle Luce, 95, and Belle Burkhard, 74. Gwen was said to have carried out the murders, while Cathy watched or helped. At work, they even bragged about what they had done, but everyone thought it was just another one of their sick jokes. No one reported them. Then in 1987, their relationship began to fall apart. Gwen asked Cathy to kill someone herself to prove her love, but Cathy refused. Gwen ended things and moved back to Texas, where she got a new job in a hospital. Cathy was heartbroken and angry. Soon, she turned to her ex-husband Ken and confessed everything, that she and Gwen had killed several patients at Alpine Manor. Ken didn't know if she was telling the truth, but after 2 years of silence, he finally went to the police in 1988. Many workers were shocked when they heard the accusations, but some admitted that Gwen and Cathy had always made strange comments. At first, Cathy denied everything, but after a few days, she called the police back and decided to confess. She said that Gwen was the one who actually killed the patients, while she helped as a lookout. Cathy said they did it to feel closer, to have a secret that would tie them together forever. Police then went to Texas to talk to Gwen, who denied everything and said Cathy was lying out of revenge. There was no physical evidence linking Gwen to the crimes. To confirm the story, authorities had the bodies of 2 victims, Margaret and Edith, exhumed. The tests didn't prove suffocation, but based on Cathy's confession, the deaths were ruled as murders. Both women were charged. Cathy agreed to testify against Gwen in exchange for a lighter sentence. She was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. Gwen went to trial in 1989, still insisting she was innocent. Despite the lack of solid evidence, a former girlfriend of Gwen testified that Gwen had admitted to killing 5 people. The jury believed her, and Gwen was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Years later, in 1992, a book called Forever in 5 Days told a very different story. It claimed Cathy was the real manipulator, a liar who had tricked Gwen and even the court. Some people now believe Cathy planned the killings to control Gwen and later blamed her out of jealousy. Cathy served over 30 years in prison. She was denied parole 8 times before finally being released in January 2020. She now lives quietly in South Carolina. Gwen Graham is still serving her life sentence in Michigan. She continues to say she is innocent and that Cathy made everything up. After the truth came out, families of the victims sued Alpine Manor for hiring unstable employees. The nursing home shut down soon after. A new facility now stands where Alpine Manor once was. a quiet building hiding the dark story of two women whose love turned into a deadly obsession. Michael Ryan and the Rulo Cult, USA, 1983. In the early 1980s, police got a strange tip about a small group living on a farm in Rulo, Nebraska. The caller said there were bodies buried on the land. When police arrived, they uncovered the dark truth behind a dangerous cult led by a man named Michael Ryan. Michael Ryan was born in 1948 and grew up in Nebraska. His childhood seemed normal, though his mother was known to be very strict. As a young man, he enjoyed hunting, but one day he accidentally shot his own foot, which caused him to miss a lot of school and eventually drop out. He worked many small jobs after that, mostly as a truck driver. He married a woman named Ruth, and they had children together. But after a bad truck accident left him with serious back pain, he couldn't work for months. During that time, he started listening to the speeches of a man named James Wickstrom, who ran a group that talked about survival and religion. Wickstrom's ideas were extreme and hateful, blaming the government and certain races for society's problems. At first, Michael thought Wickstrom's teachings were strange, but over time, he began to believe them. He became convinced that the world was going to end soon, and that only a chosen few would survive. He started to think of himself as a prophet sent by God, whom he called Yahweh. Michael began testing his followers using what he called an arm test. He would ask a question to Yahweh, hold someone's arm, and if the arm stayed strong, he said the answer was yes. If it dropped, it meant no. It was a simple trick, but his followers believed it meant he could speak to God. Soon, Michael gathered a group of loyal followers, mostly young men who looked up to him. Some of them included his teenage son, Dennis, and others who helped run the farm. Over time, Michael's control grew stronger. He even began marrying women within the group, claiming it was God's will. One of the men who joined was Rick Stice, a widower with 3 young children. Michael told Rick that they could all live together and prepare for the end of the world. Rick agreed, not realizing how dangerous things would become. At first, the group focused on survival training, collecting weapons, and stealing from nearby farms to make money. But soon, Michael's behavior turned violent. He claimed that some members were not loyal to Yahweh, including Rick, his 5-year-old son Luke, and another young man named James Thim. He made them live apart from the others and treated them harshly. Michael often punished people for what he called sins or doubting Yahweh. He claimed that pain would purify them. Little Luke, only 5 years old, was especially targeted. Michael forced the boy to do cruel tasks and treated him terribly. The other adults were too scared to stop him. Eventually, Luke died after being badly mistreated. Rick was terrified and tried to escape the farm, but he didn't tell the police what was happening right away. Sadly, because of that, things got even worse. After Rick ran away, Michael turned his anger toward James Thim, another follower who had started to question him. Michael told the group that James had offended God and must be punished. The men were forced to take part in these punishments. Michael kept saying that everything he ordered was commanded by Yahweh, and the others, afraid of him and believing he spoke for God, obeyed. James suffered terrible abuse over several days until he finally died from his injuries. His body was buried on the farm beside young Luke. For a while, no one outside the farm knew what had happened, but soon after, some members of the group were caught stealing from other farms. When police came to investigate, they noticed something was very wrong. Around the same time, Rick finally came forward and told authorities what had really been happening on the Rulo farm. When investigators searched the property, they found the graves of both Luke and James. The details shocked the entire country. The case became one of the most disturbing examples of how cults can twist faith and control people's minds through fear. In the trial that followed, Michael Ryan was found guilty of murder and many other crimes. He was sentenced to death in 1986. But before he could be executed, he died in prison in 2015 from cancer. His teenage son, Dennis Ryan, was also convicted for helping his father, but later had his sentence reduced. The court believed he had been manipulated and brainwashed by his father at a young age. He was released after serving several years. Other members of the cult, including Tim Haverkamp, also received prison sentences, but were later freed. The farm was destroyed, and the land was eventually sold off. Margy Palm, 1981. Stephen Peter Morin was born on February 19, 1951, in Rhode Island. As a teenager, he lived in Florida, where his life quickly went off track. He dropped out of school, started using drugs, and began stealing cars. By age 14, he was already in trouble with the law and sent to a juvenile center. But even there, he kept escaping. One time, he stole his father's car, crashed it, and when police caught him, he escaped again, leading them on a high-speed chase, going 100 miles per hour. He was caught, charged as an adult, and sent to prison. Prison life was rough for Stephen. He claimed other inmates often attacked him. When he got out, he didn't change. He kept breaking the law, moving from place to place across the U.S. He was arrested several times for assault, drugs, and even killing his girlfriend's cat. In 1976, he attacked a 14-year-old girl in California, but released her soon after. To escape the police, he kept on the move, from Las Vegas to other states, using false names wherever he went. Stephen eventually married and decided to start a new career as a serial killer. The exact number of people he killed isn't known, but investigators believe it could be up to 48 victims across several states, including California, Nevada, Texas, and New York. In 1981, Stephen crossed paths with a woman named Margy Palm from Texas. Margy grew up in a wealthy and respected family in El Paso. Her father died in a car crash when she was 11. In 1973, she married a man named Bart, and they moved to San Antonio. Margy became very religious after attending a retreat in New Mexico. She devoted her life to Christianity and focused on spreading love and faith. She and her husband had 2 young children, and she stayed home to care for them. On December 11, 1981, Stephen was in San Antonio. That morning he shot 2 women while trying to steal a car. One of them died. He then held another woman hostage in a motel, but when police surrounded the building, he escaped through a bathroom window. Later that day, he was hiding in a Kmart parking lot, high on drugs and carrying a gun. At the same time, Margy was shopping there for Christmas gifts. As she walked to her SUV, Stephen appeared, pointed the gun at her, and forced her into the car. He told her if she didn't cooperate, he would kill her. Margy's car was full of Christmas presents, which made Stephen angry. He told her she must have had an easy, spoiled life. A princess, he called her. Terrified, Margy began praying out loud. When he told her to keep her hands still, she placed them on his head and prayed for the evil spirits to leave his body. Afterward, he didn't hurt her. Instead, he started driving and talking to her. They stopped at a parking lot, then at a 7-Eleven store, where he sent her inside to buy beer, cigarettes, and a newspaper. On the front page, Margy saw his face. The headline said he had killed 30 people. She realized just how much danger she was in. Still, she didn't try to escape. She later said she felt that God was telling her to stay calm. As they drove, Stephen started opening up to Margy. He told her about his son, his regrets, and how much he hated himself. Margy listened patiently and told him everyone could be forgiven, even him. She asked, "If your own son did what you did, could you forgive him?" That question made him think. Eventually, Stephen broke down crying and prayed out loud, saying, "I'm sorry, Lord, for everything I've done." He emptied the bullets from his gun and handed them to Margy. He said he would never kill again, though he still had some bullets hidden in his pocket. Margy told him about a preacher named Kenneth Copeland. Stephen got excited and said he would go see the preacher in Fort Worth and hand him the gun as a sign of giving up violence. They drove to a bus station in Kerrville, Texas, where Margy bought him a ticket to Fort Worth. Before leaving, Stephen hugged her, kissed her cheek, and gave her one of his earrings. Margy then drove home, still shaken but alive. When she got home, the police were already there. At first she lied and said she had escaped earlier, but later she told them the truth, that Stephen was on a bus heading north. Police caught him at a bus station in Austin, sitting calmly and reading the Bible Margy had given him. Stephen confessed to murder and was sentenced to death. He told the court, "The only deal I've made is with God." But even after his conversion, he received 2 more death sentences for other murders. While on death row, he wrote letters and called Margy often. She even visited him 15 times in prison. He said she had changed his life and made him believe in forgiveness. Margy never forgot that he was a dangerous man who deserved to stay behind bars. On March 13, 1985, Stephen Morin was executed in Texas at age 34. He spent his final moments talking about religion and asking for forgiveness. Stephen Morin was a smart but deeply troubled man who hurt and killed many people. He was described as charming and manipulative, someone who could make people believe he had changed, even when he hadn't. Some say he truly found faith in the end. Others believe he only used religion to make himself feel important and to gain sympathy. The Boys on the Tracks case, Don Henry and Kevin Ives, USA, 1987. This case is one of the strangest and most mysterious stories from the 1980s. It involves 2 teenage boys, Don Henry and Kevin Ives, whose deaths shocked their small town in Arkansas. Many people still believe there is far more to the story than what the official reports said. Don Henry was 16 years old, and Kevin Ives was 17. They were best friends who did almost everything together. People described them as normal teenage boys. They went on dates with their girlfriends, hung out with friends on weekends, and liked typical hobbies like hunting. On the night of August 23, 1987, the boys met up with some friends at a common hangout spot in Bryant, Arkansas. It was a parking lot where local kids often gathered. Around midnight, Don and Kevin left to go to Don's house. They picked up a .22 rifle because they planned to go spotlighting, a type of night hunting where one person uses a flashlight to lure animals and the other takes the shot. Before leaving, they spoke briefly with Don's father and told him they would be hunting near the train tracks not far from their town. This was normal for them, and nothing seemed unusual. In the early hours of the morning, a 6,000-ton cargo train was passing through Bryant. The train's driver saw 2 bodies lying side by side across the tracks. At first, he thought they were playing a prank or a game of chicken. He honked the horn repeatedly to warn them. When they did not move, he pulled the emergency brake. Because the train was so heavy, it did not stop until about a mile later. Sadly, it ran over the boys. When authorities arrived, they identified the victims as Don Henry and Kevin Ives. Don's rifle was lying next to them, and a green tarp partially covered their bodies. Train workers said the boys had not moved at all, even with the loud horn. The first investigation raised many questions. The medical examiner said the boys had smoked the equivalent of 20 marijuana joints, which caused them to fall into a deep sleep on the tracks. The official ruling was that their deaths were an accident caused by the train. But the families and friends of Don and Kevin were furious. They said it was completely out of character for the boys to smoke so much marijuana, especially while out hunting. They also said it made no sense for them to lie down on active train tracks and cover themselves with a tarp. Many people in the town agreed this story seemed impossible. For months, the boys' families begged authorities to reopen the case. At first, they faced strong resistance. Police and officials seemed unwilling to dig deeper. Finally, 5 months later, the case was reopened. The second autopsy uncovered new findings. The boys had smoked only 1 to 3 joints, not 20. Even more disturbing, one boy was already dead before the train hit him, and the other was unconscious. Don's shirt also showed signs of stab wounds. Because of this, the cause of death was changed from accidental to probable homicide. This was a huge turning point. It suggested that the boys had been attacked before they were placed on the train tracks. People began to suspect a larger cover-up. The case grew even stranger when it was linked to another incident. In 1984, just 3 years earlier, 2 men in Oklahoma, Billy Don Heinlein and Dennis Decker, were found lying on train tracks and killed in almost the exact same way. A month after their deaths, a meth lab was discovered only 1.5 miles away. Some believed those men had witnessed something illegal and were silenced. There were also rumors in Bryant about a man seen near the tracks before Don and Kevin died. He was described as wearing a military-style uniform, but he was never identified. One eyewitness even claimed to see a police officer beating two boys in a parking lot and forcing them into a truck the night they died. However, this testimony was never confirmed, and there was no solid proof that the boys were Don and Kevin. The investigation dragged on for years. Despite all the strange evidence, the case was closed in 1995 without any arrests. Many people, including Kevin's mother, Linda Ives, believe the boys' deaths were connected to a drug ring in Saline County, where they lived. In 1996, Linda released a video naming people she believed were involved in a large-scale drug operation and a cover-up. She said this could explain why officials resisted reopening the case and why evidence was hidden. The main theory is that Don and Kevin accidentally saw something they were not supposed to see, possibly a drug drop near the train tracks, and were killed to keep them quiet. More than 35 years later, the deaths of Don Henry and Kevin Ives remain unsolved. The case is still surrounded by questions about drugs, corruption, and a possible cover-up. The Death House Landlady Dorothea Puente, USA, 1982. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. She was the sixth of 7 children and had a very hard childhood. Her mother, Trudy May, was abusive and would often threaten to leave her children. Her father, Jesse James, would scare them by threatening to take his own life. When Dorothea was 8 years old, her father died from tuberculosis, which he got after being exposed to poison gas during World War I. A year later, her mother died in a motorcycle accident. The 7 children were left orphaned, and Dorothea was sent to an orphanage before some relatives in Fresno took her in. As she grew older, Dorothea started lying about her past. She would tell people she had been born in Mexico and was one of 18 children. At 16, she left California and went to Olympia, Washington. She had no money, so she worked on the streets. During that time, she met a young soldier named Fred McFall who had served in World War II. They married in 1945 and moved to Nevada. Dorothea had 2 daughters within a year, but she didn't want to raise them. She gave one up for adoption and sent the other to live with relatives. Fred was upset about this, and in 1948 he divorced her. After that, Dorothea moved to San Bernardino. With little money, she began stealing and committing small crimes. She was caught trying to use a fake check and spent 4 months in jail. While there, she learned to forge signatures and pickpocket. After being released, she broke her probation and fled the area. In 1952, she married again, this time to a man named Axel Johansson in Sacramento. Their marriage quickly went bad. Dorothea lied to him about her past, spent money carelessly, and kept working as a sex worker. She also drank heavily, and their fights often became violent. Dorothea pretended to be a doctor and treated neighbors for illnesses using natural remedies. She told people she had learned these skills while growing up in Mexico, another lie. Axel had her committed to a psychiatric hospital in 1961, where doctors diagnosed her as a pathological liar with an unstable personality. Then she opened a brothel disguised as a bookkeeping business. When it was discovered, she was arrested and spent 90 days in jail. She and Axel divorced in 1966, though she later said he still sent her Christmas cards and called him a kind man. In 1968, Dorothea married her 3rd husband, a much younger man named Roberto Puente. He was from Mexico and is said to have married her mainly for money and citizenship. The marriage lasted only a year. Dorothea started a fake rehabilitation program for alcoholics and opened a boarding house for people who needed help. This business became successful and gave her access to many influential people. Dorothea claimed to know famous politicians, including California governors and even President Ronald Reagan, though there's little proof of that. She married again briefly, but that relationship also failed. By 1978, Dorothea was back in trouble for fraud. She had been taking her tenants' benefit checks, forging their names, and cashing them for herself. She got 5 years probation and was banned from running a boarding house. Ignoring that rule, she began working as a caregiver for the elderly. She acted kind and gentle, dressing like a sweet grandmother. Many people trusted her, but it was all part of her act. In 1982, one of her tenants, Ruth Monroe, moved in with her. Soon after, Ruth became sick and died. The coroner said it was suicide, but her family believed Dorothea poisoned her and stole her money. She began drugging her elderly clients and stealing their belongings and checks. She was caught again and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released after 3 for good behavior. Psychologists described her as dangerous and lacking remorse. While in prison, she started writing to a 77-year-old man named Everson Gilmouth. When she got out, he picked her up in his truck, and they began dating. Soon after, she gave that same truck to a handyman and asked him to build a large box and dump it near a river. Inside that box was Everson's body. Dorothea continued to collect his pension for years. She opened another boarding house at 1426 F Street in Sacramento, even though she wasn't allowed to. She took in elderly and disabled tenants, many referred by social workers, and seemed to care for them. In truth, she was drugging and killing them, then burying their bodies in her backyard while keeping their government checks. In November 1988, police came looking for a missing man named Alvaro Bert Montoya, who had lived in her house. When they searched her yard, they found human remains. Dorothea fled the city, but while she was gone, police found 7 bodies buried behind her home. She was soon caught in Los Angeles and charged with 9 murders, including her boyfriend Everson and her tenant Ruth. At her trial, the jury found her guilty of 3 murders, though she was suspected of more. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Even then, Dorothea claimed she was innocent. She spent the rest of her life in prison at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. She died there on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82. The house where her victims were found was later sold. The new owners allowed tours to raise money for charity and put up signs and displays that told the story of the death house landlady. It was early morning when a Fall River detective was woken by the sound of his beeper. A murder had taken place, though he was unaware that the crime would eventually instill fear nationwide. People would soon hear on TV that Satanists might be living among them. The victim's name was Doreen Ann Levesque. She had a rough childhood and later turned to work on the streets. On October 13, 1979, her body was found under the bleachers at a high school. She had been tied up and beaten so badly that her face was almost unrecognizable. People began whispering that the murder might have been part of a strange ritual. At that time, Fall River, Massachusetts was a poor and broken city. The once busy textile town was filled with drugs, crime, and poverty. Many young women worked the streets just to survive. Doreen was one of them. A few months later, another young woman, Barbara Raposa, went missing in November. Her body was found in January 1980. Like Doreen, she had been tied up and beaten. The police believed a serial killer was on the loose. Then, on February 8, 1980, police spoke with a 20-year-old sex worker named Karen Marsden. She was terrified and said she knew about satanic rituals happening in a nearby forest. When asked who led these rituals, she said only one name, Satan. She told police that if she said his real name, she'd be killed. The next day she went missing, and later her skull and hair were found in the forest. Another woman, Robin Murphy, just 17 at the time, came into the picture. Like the others, she had a troubled past and worked on the streets. She also knew the victims. Police soon learned that she worked for and sometimes with a violent pimp named Carl Drew, a 26-year-old man many feared. Police thought Drew was the Satan. They believed he used satanic threats to control women. Murphy told them that Drew had killed Marsden because she was about to talk to the cops. She said Drew held dark rituals in the forest and forced her to take part in Marsden's killing. Murphy's story created panic. Across the U.S., people started believing in satanic cults that killed and tortured people. News channels loved these stories, but there was no proof they were true. At Drew's trial, Murphy testified that she had helped kill Marsden, and that Drew was the leader of a satanic group. She said Drew made her cut Marsden's and that he later cut off her finger to steal her ring. The jury was horrified and Drew was found guilty. he was sentenced to life in prison. But there was no real evidence linking Drew to the murders, only Murphy's words. Later, she admitted she had lied. She said prosecutors pressured her to blame Drew and add satanic details. She had been promised a lighter sentence in return. Another man, Andy Maltas, also came under suspicion. He had a long history of hurting women and seemed to know too many details about the murders. Some people believe he was the real killer. Over the years, new witnesses said they were forced by police to lie in court. Some said the murders didn't happen the way Murphy had described at all. Many now believe Carl Drew was innocent. Even today, Drew says he was caught in a wave of satanic panic and punished for crimes he didn't commit. Murphy, who lied in court, was later sent back to prison for breaking parole. In the end, there's no proof that satanic rituals ever happened in Fall River.